Hello and welcome. Tonight, we won't be wearing a toga, building a bathhouse, or drafting military blueprints in a marble atrium. No, tonight we won't march with the legions, but linger just beyond their polished shields and perfectly paved roads. Tonight, we'll drift into the woods, where the language is thick with consonants, the air smells like smoke and mud, and the goats are very much part of the furniture. Welcome to the edges of the Roman Empire. Not the part with columns and senators, but the part with tree bark soup and a deep mistrust of anything written on parchment. Now, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If you like my content, your support truly means a lot to me. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely interested in knowing who is joining us from around the world. The Roman Empire. The stuff of epic movies, dusty textbooks, and people who use Latin phrases in casual conversation. Rome built aqueducts. Rome built roads. Rome wrote about itself a lot, which is helpful because it's given us a grand one-sided scrapbook of triumphs, titles, and the occasional gladiator mishap. But what about the people Rome didn't write for? The ones not invited to the orgy or the census? The so-called barbarians. Now let's be clear, barbarian was not a term of endearment. The word came from the Greek barbar, which was how their polite little city-states mocked the way foreigners talked. To the Romans, anyone who didn't speak Latin, used spoons, or organized their society around bureaucracy and sandals was suspicious at best, dangerous at worst. Gauls, Britons, Germans, Dacians, Sarmatians, Parthians, names grouped together by one thing, not being Roman. But not being Roman didn't mean being primitive. It just meant you didn't show up on their maps wearing the right uniform. In fact, many of these so-called barbarians had cities, trade, art, religion, oral histories, and most importantly, very sharp spears. They farmed, fought, crafted, raised children, sang songs, told jokes, and navigated seasonal allergies like everyone else. It's just that instead of sipping watered-down wine in a forum, they were sipping cloudy ale near a fire, while someone in the back sharpened an axe. So tonight, let's not wake up in a marble villa with a mosaic floor and a slave bringing grapes. Let's not start our day debating Cicero or saluting the aqueduct. Let's not even try to read Latin, because honestly, it wasn't our dialect anyway. Instead, let's crawl out from under a scratchy wool blanket in a timber-framed hut, tucked beside a river with an unpronounceable name. Let's feel the cold of a foggy dawn in the forest and the weight of a life built just outside of the imperial glow. You're not a Roman. You're a member of a tribe, maybe a Germanic group along the Rhine, or a Gallic clan somewhere near modern-day France. Or perhaps you're one of the painted people of Britannia. Wherever you are, your world is wooden, smoky, and more horizontal than vertical. You live low to the ground, in buildings that bend in the wind. Your gods live in trees and rivers, not marble temples. You know how to carve bone into buttons, and you don't need a legionnaire to tell you where north is. Your language? It's full of hard stops and soft murmurs. It hasn't been written down yet, but that doesn't mean it isn't rich. Your family name might mean wolf-blooded or son of thunder, or possibly he who tripped into a beehive once and never heard the end of it. You live in a village, or a cluster of huts, or a hill fort, depending on your tribe's flair for architecture. And while Rome scoffs at your style, you have something they don't. Local mushrooms and a deep mistrust of centurions. Life here is harder, yes. You don't have running water unless it's raining and you forgot to close the roof flap. You don't have a court of law, unless you count the local chief with a strong opinion and a bigger axe. But what you do have is rhythm. Life moves with the seasons, not the Senate. Summer is for growing and raiding. Autumn is for storing and storytelling. Winter is for surviving and hoping the wolves don't get too curious. Spring is for mud and regret. The fire in the center of your home is never allowed to die. Not just because it's cold, but because it connects you to your ancestors. You've heard tales passed down from generation to generation of brave warriors, vengeful gods, and that one guy who tried to raid a Roman fort with a spoon. Your elders speak of the old times before the empire expanded, and your children play with carved wooden animals, dreaming of the next feast or the next fight. Occasionally, a trader comes through, sometimes Roman, sometimes not. He brings strange fabrics, coins with dead emperors' faces, and stories about places where people bathe daily and argue about philosophy for fun. You listen, smile politely, and continue weaving your basket. Because while Rome might have books and roads, you've got goats, and the very real understanding that you could be swallowed by a bog if you step in the wrong place. It's all about priorities. And yes, maybe you've seen a Roman soldier up close, perhaps on the edge of a patrol, his armor gleaming, his helmet absurdly plumed. You probably muttered something in your own tongue, like, "Look at that walking soup can." You've heard the rumors that they're organized, relentless, and incapable of making a stew without fish sauce. You know the empire wants your land, your labor, and your loyalty. And you're not sure which of those is the worst option. Because when Rome comes knocking, it never just borrows a cup of flour. It wants taxes, tribute, and treaties, often in that order. And when diplomacy fails, the legions follow, tall, trained, and terrifyingly punctual. They bring roads, forts, walls, and a tendency to stab first and ask in Latin later. But not yet. For now, you still wake up on your side of the border. The birds are chirping. The fire crackles low. Someone is already outside chopping wood with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The goats are plotting mischief, as always. So close your eyes. Let's stretch slowly into the life of a barbarian. No scrolls, no politics, no public fountains. Just dirt, dignity, and a well-worn tunic that definitely smells like last night's stew. The empire is out there, but for now, we're staying right here, where the smoke rises gently from your thatch roof, where the wolves keep their distance, and where the name Rome is said with a squint. You're not here to conquer, you're just here to live, one frost-covered morning at a time. Now let's begin our day. Just another quiet soul in a loud, wide world the Romans didn't understand. You wake up not to the sound of a Roman lyre, but to someone sneezing directly into the communal blanket. It's your brother, or your aunt, or possibly your goat. It's hard to tell in the early morning blur. The hearth fire is just barely smouldering, throwing off the last embers of warmth it has to give. Your breath clouds the air in short puffs, and your first thought is not of glory or empire. It's of socks. You don't have any, but you think of them often. Outside, it's still dark. But that's never stopped anyone here from starting the day. You live beyond the Rhine, or perhaps past the Danube, or north of Hadrian's Wall. That stone scar the Romans dragged across Britain to keep out your ancestors and their bad attitudes. Wherever it is, it's not Rome. It's not even a Roman province. It's the world Rome pretends not to see. The world they map with vague drawings of trees and the occasional monster. Your home is a hut. That's what the Romans would call it anyway. To you, it's a timber-framed masterpiece of smoke retention, draft distribution, and creaky floor planks. There's a central fire pit, blackened beams above, and fur scraps hanging where the wind blows hardest. The walls are wattle and daub, a fancy phrase for woven sticks smeared with mud. It's not glamorous, but it keeps most of the rain out and some of the warmth in. In a pinch, it also keeps the chickens in too. You share this space with your immediate family. 3 generations of in-laws, a handful of livestock, and that one cousin who's always trying to invent something, usually dangerous. Privacy doesn't exist. Personal space is measured in breaths, and arguments are best settled before someone reaches for a drinking horn. There is no plumbing. Your water comes from a nearby stream that requires you to walk half a mile with a bucket, and the hope that today is not the day wolves find you interesting. There is no breakfast menu. You'll eat what's left from last night's pot, some root vegetable stew perhaps, or dried meat with the texture of tree bark. Sometimes you just gnaw a piece of black bread and pretend it has flavor. Still, it's home. You've got carved wooden cups that your uncle insists are antiques. You've got woven blankets passed down from your grandmother, who claims she once slapped a Roman in the face with a ladle. You've got your tools, your furs, your fire, and your family. Loud, stubborn, and entirely unbothered by the lack of marble. The Romans might call you uncivilized, but you brush that off like mud from your tunic. You've got law in your own way. You've got gods, you've got traditions, and you've got a suspiciously sophisticated understanding of metallurgy for someone who doesn't have a bathhouse. Your people have customs going back centuries, and while none of them involve Senate meetings or bread and circus politics, they work just fine. You begin your morning with chores. First, the animals. The pigs need feeding, the chickens need shoeing, and the cow needs convincing. Then comes the water, freezing of course, and then wood. Firewood is life. You never have enough, and it always weighs more than you remember. You split logs with a dull axe while muttering quietly to yourself about the unfairness of snow. After that comes fence duty. Fences are important, not just for keeping animals in, but for keeping other things out. Wild beasts, rival clans, or your neighbor's goat, which has developed a taste for your roof thatch. Repairing the fence involves more arguing than hammering, mostly because no one agrees on where the fence line actually is. There's no school bell to ring, but children start their day by being given a task and told not to break anything or set anything on fire. They usually succeed in at least one of those goals. They learn by watching, mimicking, and occasionally surviving. They're stronger than they look, quieter than you'd think, and always a little sticky. And as the sun rises, reluctantly through a grey mist, you begin to see your village for what it is. It's a cluster of huts, smoke curling from every rooftop, men sharpening tools, women hanging wet hides to dry, elders sitting near the fire telling half-true stories, and that same cousin, now covered in soot, trying to attach a cartwheel to a sled. You haven't seen a Roman today. You might not see one all year, but you know they're out there. You've heard of their walls, their roads, their governors with polished boots. You've heard that they keep time with sundials and write angry letters on wax. You've heard of their gods, their coins, their preference for wine over proper fermented ale. You've heard and you've squinted. Because your world is different. Your world doesn't run on Roman time. It runs on weather, livestock, and gossip. You know when the seasons are changing because your knees hurt. You know who's sick because the healer shows up with her odd-smelling pouch. You know the moon phases because that's when the hunters argue about whose turn it is to forget the bait. You've never seen a Colosseum, but you've seen the stars reflected in a forest lake. You've never tasted garum, that infamous Roman fish sauce, but you've had smoked boar roasted on an open flame, with herbs gathered by hand. You don't know Latin, but you can tell 15 different kinds of snow just by how they feel in your boots. So while the empire marches onward, somewhere behind the hills, you go about your day, gathering, mending, preparing. No crowds, no courthouses, no legions, just life, simple, loud, hard, and real. Rome may write the histories, but you live the moments they forget to mention, the ones without triumph, but full of purpose. And as the morning unfolds beyond the empire's reach, you know one thing for sure. You're not uncivilized, you're just not invited, but that's all right. You've got soup to stir and goats to scold. Let's move into the rest of your day, where contact with the Romans starts to feel closer and not always welcome. You start the day wrapped in a wool tunic that smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and possibly wild onions. It's itchy, but it's yours, unlike the Roman wardrobe. All flowing togas and impractical sandals. Your clothing is built for surviving actual weather. Your fur cloak isn't for fashion. It's for not freezing to death before breakfast. Roman writers often described your people as dirty, half-naked, and covered in mud. But Roman writers also thought lead pipes were a good idea. So who's really judging here? The truth is, your daily life is far more routine and complex than the empire gives you credit for. There's no marble, true, but there's order. It just doesn't come in scrolls or with senators shouting in domed buildings. Your village hums with quiet, productive energy. Some of the men head to the fields, others to the river. Farming is a constant seasonal rhythm. You plant barley and rye, you gather roots and wild greens, and you hope, truly hope, that the weather holds this year and the rabbits stop treating your crops like an open buffet. Your tools are made of iron you forged yourself or inherited from your grandfather, who got it from someone who once hit a Roman with it, according to family legend. Fishing, if you're coastal or riverbound, is just as crucial. You don't have Roman fish sauce, but you do have smoked eel and the occasional trout. And let's be honest, no one's cried over missing fermented anchovy paste. Nets are hand-knotted, traps carved from wood, and you know the quiet spots where the fish sleep under frozen water. The trick isn't catching them, it's doing it before your fingers go numb. And then, of course, there's raiding. Not always, and not everyone, but depending on the tribe and the season, the chance of light to moderate raiding increases like a weather forecast. You're not out for empire building. You just want a few shiny things, maybe some Roman amphorae, and the smug satisfaction of knowing someone in a toga is upset somewhere. Plus, raids keep the youth busy and give the village a story to talk about for weeks, especially if someone accidentally brings back a Roman garden gnome instead of treasure. But raids aside, most of your life isn't warfare. It's weaving, mending, herding, crafting. It's stacking firewood, patching roofs, curing hides. You make your own clothes, your own tools, your own songs. You sit by the fire and tell stories, not because you're primitive, but because they're good stories. There's a tale about a wolf who outsmarted a Roman tax collector, and another about a hunter who swore he saw Mars himself tripping over a tree root. No one writes these things down. You don't need to. You remember them. In fact, your entire culture is memory-based. No scrolls, no books. Just recitation, repetition, and a deep respect for people who can remember 10 generations of names without checking a tablet. Your elders carry the history. Your skalds, the poets and singers, carry the sagas, and everyone knows the rules, even if no one has etched them into stone. Roman law may be obsessed with paperwork, but your laws come with blood, honor, and a very loud uncle who always remembers who owes what to whom. Your gods are many and local. Each grove, stream, and hill might have its own guardian spirit, and no one prays the same way twice. Some call on forest deities for luck, others leave offerings to river gods for safe crossing. There's no pantheon, but there's plenty of reverence. And while the Romans have temples, you have stones stacked with care, feathers tied to branches, and whispered invocations under the moonlight. You don't need columns to feel close to the divine. Your festivals are noisy, joyous, and often baffling to outsiders. There's usually a pig involved, and dancing, and that one cousin who drinks too much fermented berry juice and starts declaring himself king of the mushrooms. Rituals mark the harvest, the solstice, the passing of ancestors. They're not written down, but they're never forgotten. To Roman eyes, your life looks chaotic. They see no city walls, no aqueducts, no senators. They see fur, fire, and shouting. But they don't see the structure under the surface. The way disputes are settled with long talks and gift-giving. The way alliances are made with shared meals and symbolic offerings. Your society is layered, flexible, and surprisingly fair in its own jagged-edged way. And if a Roman traveller were ever to sit beside your hearth, and some have, either as traders or confused deserters, they might notice that while you don't quote Cicero, you have your own kind of wisdom. You speak in proverbs, not paragraphs. Never trust a man with too clean a cloak, you say, or a silent goat still kicks. You know the world through mud, frost, and fire, not ink and ink pots. But knowledge is knowledge, and survival is its own kind of literacy. Still, things are shifting. You've heard stories. More Romans showing up in the region, building outposts, demanding tribute. Their soldiers march on roads that cut across your hunting paths. Their traders come with coins and leave with furs. Their maps now include your forests, drawn badly but ambitiously. Some among your people welcome the trade. Others sharpen their spears. There are murmurs of chiefs making deals and others refusing to bow. No one's quite sure what's coming, but it's coming. You keep your head down, but your ears open. You tend your fields with one eye on the horizon. You chant your songs a little louder at the next feast. And when your children ask why the sky looks red some evenings, you say it's just the gods cooking dinner. You don't mention the smoke rising from a Roman fort. Roman historians would call this a frontier. You call it home. You call it the place where the old ways still matter. You call it yours. And now, as we begin to approach the edges where empire touches your world, you might want to hold on to your goats. Things are about to get diplomatic, in the Roman sense. Let's wander a little further into the first moments of contact, when soldiers arrive, with their sandals, their Latin, and their very sharp sense of entitlement. The first sign that things are changing isn't the soldiers, it's the wine. Sweet, sharp, in little clay jugs with funny stamps on the bottom, Roman wine starts showing up at village feasts. Along with it come little glass beads, bronze trinkets, and coins that don't seem to buy anything locally, but make nice weights for holding down rabbit skins. Trade has begun, quietly, and at first it's not so bad. You hand over amber from the riverbank, wool spun by your cousins, furs caught in the forest where the foxes scream at night. In return, the Romans offer luxuries. They're strange things: wine that burns your throat, metal that shines too brightly, glass that seems like it shouldn't exist. You squint at it, touch it, and wonder how they got a rock to look like ice. Roman traders arrive dressed like they're here to conquer a dinner party. They talk fast, write things down constantly, and can't stop commenting on the mud. But they bring useful things: salt, olive oil, jewelry that makes your aunt's eyebrows arch. You want the goods, Not the empire. At first, everyone seems happy. You trade, they nod, you nod, no one gets stabbed. They go back to their strange little wagons and vanish into the woods toward the river. It feels harmless. But then the soldiers come. Not marching at first, just a few scouts, friendly-ish, curious, wearing armor that clinks like angry wind chimes. They look at your land like they're already thinking about where to put a gate. They ask questions. How many people live here? Where's the water source? Do you have a chieftain? Can they speak with him? You lie a little, mostly to make things sound less interesting. Then the builders arrive. They don't ask, they just start hammering, cutting trees, leveling ground, stacking stone. A fort, small but sharp-looking, sprouts like a poisonous mushroom at the edge of your world. You try to ignore it. You pretend the hammering is thunder and the shouting is just loud birds. But the birds don't carry javelins. You go to trade again, and suddenly there are rules. Taxes, rates. You must use Roman weights now. Your cousin's amber isn't measured in handfuls. It's valued in denarii. You don't know what a denarius is, but you're now too short. Interesting fact. Many so-called barbarians were completely fine with trade. In fact, several tribes prospered because of it. Goods flowed from Germania, Gaul, Britannia, all into Roman hands and back again. But it was when Rome started drawing borders, demanding tribute, and enforcing laws that the relationship soured. One day, a Roman official, probably named something like Tiberius Maximus Pensalus, arrives and starts writing things down. He nods politely, tells you this land is now within the Roman sphere. You don't recall being asked. You smile and nod. Later, you throw a stone at a tree and hope it's symbolic. With the fort comes more traffic. Soldiers pass through your trails now. They inspect things. They stand on hills like decorative threats. They teach some of your people Latin, mostly to explain why they can't do things anymore. Trade becomes less equal. Prices shift. What once bought you a fine Roman jug now gets you a shrug. They demand more furs, better wool, more tribute, and they keep building. Towers, roads, checkpoints. The edge of your world is becoming a Roman map. One of your neighbors starts wearing a Roman belt. He insists it's for fashion, not allegiance. You notice the fort's shadow stretching longer across your hunting grounds. It's not open war, not yet, just occupation with good manners. The Romans are very polite as they absorb things. Your land, your people, your goats. Always with a document and a very firm handshake. Sometimes a Roman patrol will stop by for your protection. They mean it, but you're not entirely sure from what. Your cousin says it's from the other tribe over the hill, the one you used to argue with during festivals. Now that tribe has Roman protection too. Everyone is protected, no one is happy. And here's where the tension thickens like old soup. You like the amphorae. You enjoy the weird Roman seasoning they use on fish. You don't want your son learning Latin, but he's quite good at it. And the fort's latrine system is honestly brilliant, but they won't stop expanding. Every new Roman post needs roads. Roads cut through fields, forests, graves. One day you find your ancestors' burial mounds disturbed, not destroyed, just moved a little to make way for a supply path. A Roman engineer explains it to you. You don't understand a word, but his smugness translates perfectly. The fort grows, you try to stay civil, you bring gifts, you smile when they talk about order and progress. You quietly teach your children how to run quietly through trees. Some among your tribe think cooperation is the best way forward. Some dream of rebellion. Most just want to keep their goats. And so, as the sun sets beyond the increasingly straight lines of Roman roads, you sit by your fire and wonder how long until your story ends up in their scrolls. You're not ready to be a footnote, and that's where we're headed next. Let's step inside the fort. Let's see how the Romans live, eat, train, and why, even with their mosaics and marching, they never quite understand the people living just outside their reach. At first the fort was a curiosity, then it became a neighbor, and now it's something more unsettling. A reminder that Rome doesn't merely visit, it settles in, builds, names things, and expects you to be grateful. Roman forts pop up across your landscape like cold, disciplined mushrooms. One day it's a quiet field where goats wander. The next, there are square walls, stone towers, and men in segmented armor arguing about supply ledgers. These are not humble huts. These are statements, carved into earth and edged with spears. And the roads, oh, the roads. They come with the forts, winding through forests like they've never seen a tree in their lives. Roman engineers, bless them, love straight lines. Nature curves. They conquer it. If a hill blocks their way, they carve through it. If a swamp lies ahead, they drain it. If a sacred grove is in the way, well, it was sacred. Before, your paths followed the rhythm of rivers and the hush of woods. Now, there's a stone road slicing the land, connecting forts like beads on a very stern necklace. Useful? Yes. Welcome? Not really. Interesting fact. Roman roads were so well built that some are still in use today. Laid with layers of stone, gravel and sand, they were marvels of engineering. Built for speed, supply chains, and of course, marching soldiers. You used to walk the same footpaths your grandmother did, collecting herbs or chasing wild chickens. Now you avoid the road. Not because it's muddy, it's remarkably well drained, to be honest, but because it's watched, patrolled. You can feel the eyes even when the helmets aren't in sight. You don't speak Latin, but you understand halt just fine when shouted by a man holding a pilum. The road isn't for you, it's for Rome. You may technically live here, but the Empire has decided it could use your homeland as a shortcut. So now you take the long way, through the woods, over that ridge, behind that abandoned sheep shed. Safer that way. Less explaining to do when someone finds you carrying furs and not the correct paperwork. Your friends joke that it's still your land. It's just under new management. You laugh, but not too loudly. Let's talk about those forts though. From the outside, they're imposing. Stone and timber and discipline. From the inside, they're an organized maze. Rows of barracks, storage buildings, a granary, and always a bathhouse. Yes, even in the cold north. Romans believe deeply in the power of warm water and public nudity. They also believe in order. Everything in the fort has a place. From the soldier's armor to his sleeping mat, to his small statue of Jupiter sitting on a shelf beside a pilfered local trinket. The soldiers train, eat, march in circles, and clean their swords with more attention than you give to cleaning your teeth. If you were allowed inside, and that's a very big if, you'd find the daily routine strangely repetitive. The legionnaires rise early, stretch stiff joints, and begin drills. They march, they throw javelins, they clean. They argue about who stole whose garum, a fermented fish sauce they seem to genuinely enjoy despite its smell. The fort has rules, lots of them, written on tablets, enforced with discipline. A soldier who drops his shield in training may get whipped. A soldier who sleeps on duty gets worse. You once saw a man tied to a post for 3 days because he let a goat wander into the granary. But discipline brings results. The fort stands straight and clean. Its towers don't sag. Its fires are always tended. And if a warning horn sounds, every man knows exactly where to run, what to grab, and which angry centurion to yell "Yes, sir" at. Not that they're always angry. Some are bored. Terribly bored. Being stationed on the frontier may sound exciting, but there are only so many drills, only so many inspections. After a while, even the fiercest Roman warrior starts carving dice from bones and betting his boots. Some, it turns out, even like talking. If you get caught near the fort, sometimes a bored sentry calls out, not to arrest you, just to chat. He'll ask if you've seen any traders, or if the river's flooding again, or whether your tribe still brews that surprisingly good beer. You nod. He offers a wink. It doesn't mean much, but it means something. Still, the line is drawn. They're inside. You're not. Their banners fly. Their Latin echoes down the road. Their bathhouse steam rises above the trees like a signal. Rome is here, and Rome intends to stay. You've become the outsider on your own land. The Empire doesn't push you out. Not yet. But it builds over your past and writes in a language you never learned. Your sacred groves become logging sites. Your old watch hill becomes a signal tower. Your stories, the ones about the spirits in the marshes and the fire that once danced in the oak tree, start sounding like nonsense to your own children, who now understand Roman measures better than the moon. And yet, you endure. You step off the road. You keep your customs quiet. You pass down the songs around low fires. You nod politely to the soldiers and whisper about the old gods when they've gone. But the question remains, what do these men really do all day? What does life inside the fort feel like when the rain pours and the paperwork piles up? What happens when Rome's warriors go home or forget why they came? Let's head inside the barracks next. Pull aside the canvas flap, dodge the officer with the scrolls, and find out how Roman soldiers eat, sleep, and argue about socks. You've crept close to the Roman garrison again. Not too close, just enough to watch. From your favorite hollow in the brush near the crest of the hill, the one that gives a good view of the eastern wall and doesn't smell like yesterday's goat, you peer down at the daily performance of the Empire's finest. They're at it again, lining up, marching, shouting things in Latin that you assume are instructions and not oddly specific insults. Life inside a Roman fort, as best you can tell, runs on three principles: order, repetition, and shouting. From sunup to sundown, the soldiers practice. Spears are raised, shields are locked, and boots hit the dirt in a rhythm that would be hypnotic if it weren't so loud. They drill like they're trying to impress Jupiter himself. Centurions, always easily spotted by their crests and permanent scowls, march alongside them, bellowing commands. Their favorite word seems to be, again. Whatever the soldiers are doing, it's not good enough. Again. Faster. Straighter. Like you mean it. Again. But then, when the sun begins to dip and the air softens just a little, the garrison becomes almost human. That's when the drills end, the armor is hung, and the sandals come off. And that's when the bad wine comes out. Interesting fact, Roman military wine was often made from the dregs, mixed with water, sometimes sour, sometimes seasoned with herbs, or even seawater. It wasn't a luxury, it was hydration. Hydration that might also make you argue with a wall. You've seen it happen. Laughter rises, someone sings badly, someone else falls into a pile of firewood. The strictest fort in the province becomes a very disciplined frat house. They eat together in small groups, huddled around campfires, or under the long eaves of their barracks. Rations are rationed. Grain, a bit of dried meat, some vegetables that have seen better days. Occasionally, if luck's been good and supply lines better, there's cheese. It's usually disappointing, but the men cheer anyway. And the garum. Oh, the garum. Roman fish sauce. You can smell it from your hiding place, even uphill. Made from fermented fish guts and salt, it's the condiment of choice for every Roman meal. They slather it on everything like it's honey. You once saw a soldier dunk bread in it like it was a treat. A dog whimpered nearby. That dog has not been seen since. Then comes the gambling. Roman soldiers love their dice, often carved from bone, and betting on everything from who can drink the fastest to who can burp the loudest without offending Mars. You've watched centurions lose their boots and their dignity in the same game, but discipline isn't completely abandoned. Even on wine night, there's a rotation. Guards remain at their posts. Watchfires are lit. The fort's gates are shut, then checked again. Say what you will about Roman paranoia. It does keep them alive. One curious truth you've learned over time: not all of these soldiers are Roman. Many speak with strange accents, wear charms from faraway lands, or pray to unfamiliar gods. That's because the Roman legions are not made solely of Italians. Many so-called barbarians, people like you, serve in auxiliary forces, especially those recruited from the very lands Rome occupies. Interesting fact, non-citizens could join the Roman auxiliary forces, and after 25 years of service, they and their children could be granted Roman citizenship. That's one way to get in the club. Decades of danger, drills, and that fish sauce. You once met a man from your own region who had joined the legions. He returned years later with Roman boots, a scar across his jaw, and a wife from Gaul who spoke 3 words of your language. All of them complaints. He walked differently. Not just from the limp, but from the weight of what he'd seen. He said nothing about battles, only that Roman tents are always cold, and centurions are allergic to joy. Still, many enlist, for the pay, for the food, for the distant dream of citizenship. And sometimes, just sometimes, because they believe in Rome's promise, order, prosperity, something resembling peace. But you're not quite convinced. Order to you looks a lot like control. Prosperity never reaches the fields. And peace, well, it doesn't last long near a garrison. You've seen the changes firsthand. The forest path your grandmother used now ends at a Roman supply depot. Your clan's old hunting ground is fenced and patrolled. And the well-worn trail by the river, where the elders used to gather herbs and gossip, is now used for military training. There are no more secrets on that path, and still the centurion shouts, and still the garum stinks, and still somehow the goat has gotten inside the camp again. That same goat. It has no respect for imperial boundaries. You admire that. But something stirs in your gut tonight. Not just curiosity or the mild envy of warm barracks. It's the quiet understanding that this cannot hold. Rome doesn't just build forts, it builds pressure, and pressure eventually needs release. Because what happens when the tribes push back? When borders don't stay still? When that centurion's wine runs dry and peace breaks like pottery? That time is coming. You can feel it in the wind, in the way the soldiers sharpen their swords even when no one's watching, in the fresh patrols that seem more alert than usual. Peace is a pause, not a promise. And the empire, for all its walls, cannot hold still forever. So tonight, you lie back in your hollow, watching the torchlight flicker through Roman slats. You listen to the faraway sound of laughter and Latin cursing, and you wonder, not for the first time, what happens when the road leads not to trade, but to war. Next, let's cross that road, not with weapons, but with caution. Because Rome didn't just build over your land, it built next door, and soon that closeness will test everything. It always starts small. A rumor, a refusal, a border post missing its usual morning greetings. Maybe someone tossed a Roman coin into the latrine, an insult both literal and smelly. Or perhaps a merchant with too much ambition and not enough tact tried to tax the wrong chieftain's nephew on market day. The details don't survive, but the mood certainly does. Tense, heavy, like a storm waiting for a goat to sneeze. Your village hears the news first through whispers. A Roman patrol, found not far from the ridge trail. Ambushed, 3 soldiers missing, 1 returned with a limp and a memory full of curses. No one claims credit. Officially. Unofficially, there's an uncle who came back from hunting with blood on his tunic and a grin he hasn't worn in seasons. Skirmishes begin, quiet at first, almost polite. A trader's cart turned over. A Roman tax collector's tent mysteriously collapses during a strong wind, or possibly because someone cut the ropes. Fields are burned under the light of a too large moon. Ambushes leave behind only arrows, footprints, and the occasional forgotten sandal. Rome does not take these things lightly. When diplomacy fails, the empire doesn't send flowers. It sends engineers. First come the roads. Faster, smoother, relentlessly straight. Then the forts. Thicker, higher, more heavily manned. Then the letters, wax-sealed and ominous, passed from one trembling provincial governor to another. And finally, of course, the legions. Interesting fact, while Roman records often describe tribal resistance as chaotic rage, archaeology suggests otherwise. Many so-called barbarian uprisings were planned with stunning precision. Ambush sites were chosen for terrain advantage. Raids timed with the shifting seasons. Communications spread through horn blasts, drum beats, and runners who could cross mountain paths faster than a Roman centurion could lace his sandals. What looks like chaos from a marble column often feels like strategy from the forest floor. Rome responds with what it knows best: escalation. Patrols triple, curfews spread, trade slows to a crawl. You see more Roman soldiers now, but fewer Roman smiles. Even the ones who used to trade cheese for gossip now clutch their spears a little tighter and speak a little less. They build more, watchtowers, ditches, temporary camps that slowly become permanent. Fields are seized for safety. Shrines to local gods are replaced with statues of Jupiter, Juno, and that one Roman official with a face like a startled ox. Your world narrows. The trails you used to hunt become restricted zones. The forest that once hummed with birdsong now rings with hammering, the metallic song of imperial construction. Even your language feels dangerous. A friend who mocked the Latin-speaking taxmen too loudly disappears one night. Off to be questioned, they say. He never comes back. The chickens miss him. So do you. The elders gather more often now. Their voices low, their brows creased. The warriors sharpen blades not just out of habit, but out of worry. Children are told to stay close. Women stitch old tunics back into armor. It's not war, not yet, but it's certainly not peace anymore. Rome calls it pacification, you call it a siege. The irony is thick enough to spread on barley bread. All this effort, the forts, the walls, the marching, to keep your kind out, while Rome is slowly building its way in. Closer each season. Not content to stand at the border anymore, the empire now wants to be in your villages, your stories, your kitchens. Because after the spears come the sandals, after the soldiers come the schools. Romanization begins, and it's sneaky. A little Latin taught at market, a Roman calendar hung in a town square, New festivals added to the old ones. Roman coins replacing barter. The old gods being reinterpreted. Your storm god is now basically Jupiter, someone says with a shrug and too many teeth. You see it most in the children. They start imitating Roman officers when they play, shouting fake Latin commands, pretending sticks are gladi. One of them builds a pretend forum out of mud bricks. He calls his friends citizens. They vote on who gets the last turnip. It's oddly organized and terrifying. You don't blame them. Rome is big, Rome is loud, Rome looks permanent, but not everyone bows. Resistance continues. Quieter now, more careful. Sabotage disguised as accident. Roads left muddy, wagons misdirected. Some people learn Latin only to better understand what's being planned against them. Knowledge is power, even when whispered in a field at midnight. And interestingly enough, some Romans begin to go native. A few soldiers marry locals. Some adopt your gods, your clothes, your ways. They start to prefer the forest air to the barracks, the beer to the wine, the silence to the Senate. Rome spreads, but it also bends, sometimes more than it admits. Still the pressure builds. Tribes are split. Leaders bought off. Betrayals bloom like spring wildflowers. The empire doesn't always conquer with swords. Sometimes it just outlasts you. You find yourself wondering what comes next. Can you push them back? Or do you hold your ground with stubborn silence? Your people survived winters without firewood, raids without maps, and hunger without complaint. Surely you can survive this. But the land feels different now, heavier, watched. So tonight, you sit by your fire and trace patterns in the dirt, the old symbols. Protection, memory, resistance. The goats, blissfully unaware, chew with the serenity only goats can manage. A distant owl hoots, and your eldest spits to the side. Roman owl, he mutters. Probably spies. The trees don't know empires. The rivers don't care for roads. But the people, your people, must choose. To endure, to adapt, or to fight. You sigh, stretch your back, feed the fire one more log. The night is quiet. The fort lights glow beyond the ridge. Peace still holds, but only by a thread woven from hope and stubbornness. Tomorrow, maybe something shifts, maybe not. For now, sleep comes. And with it, dreams of old stories, when no one knew the name Rome, and goats ruled the village square. Next, let's explore what it means when Rome decides not just to occupy, but to civilize. When their baths and temples start creeping in. When your children start thinking in Latin. And when everything familiar begins to feel strangely Roman. So Rome doesn't just show up with swords and sandals. No, that would be too easy and far too straightforward. After the forts are built, the roads paved, and the goats thoroughly unsettled, the real invasion begins. It's not led by generals this time, but by men with scrolls, stamps, and suspiciously clean fingernails. This is Romanization, the slow, sneaky process of turning you, a perfectly capable and content non-Roman, into someone who shaves daily, files taxes monthly, and bathes in public. It starts with a statue. Harmless enough. A dignified marble fellow with a square jaw and suspiciously short tunic is hoisted into the middle of your village. No one asked for him, and he doesn't say much, but there he stands, hand outstretched in eternal oration, pigeons already planning their assault. A sign appears beneath him, in Latin. No one here reads Latin, but that doesn't matter. The message is clear enough. Rome is watching, and now Rome is labeling. Soon after, a tax collector arrives. He wears a crisp toga, sandals with extra straps, and an expression of permanent disappointment. He explains, with many sighs and slow enunciations, that your village is now part of the broader Roman fiscal structure, which sounds exciting until you realize it means new taxes, more paperwork, and exactly zero benefit for your roof that still leaks every time Jupiter sneezes. Interesting historical fact. The Romans introduced censuses and tax rolls to track conquered populations, which were often unfamiliar with written bureaucracy. For many tribal societies, whose systems ran on memory and custom, this was like asking your goat to understand algebra. And the goat, as usual, was not amused. Then come the baths. At first, everyone is excited. A public bathhouse, warm water, smooth floors, steam. Then you learn the rules. You must bathe with strangers. You must do so at a designated time. There are cold pools and hot pools and lukewarm pools for the indecisive. There are towels that aren't quite towels, an oil you're supposed to rub on your body only to scrape it off again with a curved metal stick. It's called a strigil. It feels like a punishment. You miss the river? You miss bathing alone. You especially miss not having to make small talk with a half-naked Roman bureaucrat who wants to know if your cousin's granary qualifies for import tariffs. The temples follow soon after. They're large, impressive, and completely uninterested in your gods. The local grove, once sacred to your ancestors, is now being paved over for a forum, complete with marble benches and a statue of Minerva, who, frankly, looks like she'd scold you for breathing too loudly. Your gods, the ones with fur and feathers, thunder and teeth, are now considered quaint. A Roman priest visits, nods politely at your offerings, and gently suggests that Mercury might be a better fit for your weather god needs. You nod back, then leave a double offering to the old gods, just in case. Some people embrace the change. Young men start wearing togas. Children begin learning Latin phrases, mostly curses. Your neighbor changes his name from Brune to Brunius and starts offering olives instead of mead at dinner. The local chieftain hosts a Saturnalia feast and spends the entire evening trying to explain Roman seating charts to baffled elders. It ends with someone accidentally insulting Jupiter and knocking over a platter of dried figs. Others resist. Quietly, they keep speaking the old tongue, keep telling the old stories, refuse to use Roman weights or Roman dates. They carve messages in hidden corners, symbols only the village understands. A line scratched on the back of a Roman coin. A laugh passed between friends when the taxman mispronounces the name of your river and ends up invoking what you all know is the goat goddess of indigestion. And then there are those caught in the middle, unsure. They like the roads but not the rules, appreciate the plumbing but not the paperwork. They sit on Roman benches and chew traditional herbs. They say their prayers twice, once for Jupiter, once for the god of the mossy stone behind the well, just in case. It's not always violent, it's rarely dramatic, but it's everywhere. The way your market looks, the way your leaders talk, the holidays added to the calendar, and the ones slowly forgotten. Even your measuring cups are suspect now. Rome prefers amphorae. You still use the bowl your grandmother carved from ash wood and love. There's something insidious about it all. You weren't conquered in battle. You were gradually folded, filed, and footnoted into an empire that doesn't even know your name. And the worst insult? They still call you Barbarian. The term comes from the Greek barbaros, meaning someone who doesn't speak Greek. Their words just sounded like bar to refined ears. The Romans adopted it gleefully. To them, anyone who wasn't Roman wasn't civilized, which means no matter how clean your bathhouse, how straight your road, or how many Latin phrases your cousin Brunius learns, you'll still be a barbarian to them. That's the deal. You get Roman benefits, but not Roman respect. And yet, life goes on. You make do. You barter with the traders who come bearing amphorae and scrolls. You avoid the governor's clerk who insists on checking your census form even though you swear you filled it out. You teach your children both names for the sun god. You build a shrine that honors both Mars and the old spirit of the oak tree. Some call this assimilation, others call it survival. So tonight, as the bathhouse steams and the Roman road glistens under moonlight, you sit by your fire. You still speak your own tongue. You still drink your own brew. The goat, as usual, chews thoughtfully and judges everyone. Rome may be building cities, but you're still building stories. Now, let's head north, beyond the walls again, to one of those cities the Romans write about with concern. A barbarian stronghold where trade thrives, people gather, and the empire realizes that civilization doesn't always come with columns. Let's visit quietly and see what Rome gets wrong and what you've built right. Take Bibracte, for instance. Once nestled on Mont Bouvray in Gaul, it was a full-blown oppidum, a fortified Celtic city with stone ramparts, streets, artisanal quarters, and enough organization to make a Roman take notes. You've heard the rumor before. Romans whisper it at the edge of their forums. Scribes mutter it when they think no one's listening. They say barbarians have no cities. The Romans would later rename and rebuild over it, of course. That's just how they express admiration. Apparently, if a place doesn't have marble columns, 12 bathhouses, and a man with a scroll shouting taxes in Latin, it doesn't count. Oppida, that's the Latin term for large Iron Age settlements, dotted the landscapes of Gaul and beyond. These weren't just messy encampments or seasonal gatherings, they were urban hubs. But let's be honest, not everything needs to smell like olive oil and bureaucracy to be a city. There were roads, gravel, not marble, drainage ditches, which mostly worked, and local leaders managing trade, justice, and festivals that involved fewer togas and a lot more shouting at the moon. Because, yes, your people built cities. They just didn't look like Roman cities. No soaring aqueducts, no statues in heroic poses. Interesting fact, by the time Julius Caesar began his conquest of Gaul in the 50s BCE, many tribes were already minting their own coins. Yes, coins, not seashells, not barter, real currency with inscriptions, symbols, and sometimes the very charming, very mustachioed faces of local kings. No forums echoing with debates about grain subsidies. Instead, you built what actually worked. So, when Caesar walked into town expecting to civilize the place, he found people already running marketplaces, trading across regions, and debating politics, just without Roman interference. And sometimes, what worked looked like a hill fort packed with homes, workshops, and goats that knew exactly how to get into the grain storage. You had workshops producing pottery, textiles, iron tools, markets where farmers traded grain and goat cheese in quantities the empire would soon find quite useful, and laws, though written more in custom and memory than on stone tablets. No togaed magistrates here, but you did have tribal councils, elders, and warriors who were not fond of theft, deceit, or anyone trying to tax their salt. In some settlements, especially those near the Roman frontier, urban life started to blur. Roman goods flowed in, wine, oil, glass beads, and some local leaders, eager to impress, built Roman-style villas with underfloor heating, imported tiles, and wine cellars that quickly became the most talked about part of any village gossip circle. But that didn't mean you forgot who you were. You kept your feasts, your festivals, your gods, your drums, and your habit of naming children after thunder. Your cities had less stone, more wood, fewer baths, more bonfires, and the entertainment. Less amphitheatre, more seasonal wrestling match next to the sacred oak. One might argue that the second one sounds more fun. The Romans couldn't quite accept it. Their writings, from Caesar to Tacitus, often describe the people of these lands as primitive, wild, disorganized. But oddly enough, the first thing Rome did when it conquered a place was pave the roads that already existed, relocate their garrisons to local population centers, and found cities right where your people had been living for centuries. Another interesting fact, many modern European cities actually sit atop old barbarian settlements that predate the Roman presence. Lyon, Paris, Vienna. These were once tribal hubs, adapted over time, Romanized later, and sometimes renamed so many times their original identity was paved over with Latin and concrete. But dig deep enough, archaeologically or metaphorically, and there it is, a layer of your old world, still humming beneath their imperial gloss. There's something satisfying about that. Knowing that beneath the Roman baths and basilicas, beneath the layers of mosaic and bureaucracy, your foundations still hold. You didn't need marble to matter. You had trade networks reaching from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. You crafted jewelry that ended up on Roman necks. You forged weapons so well balanced that even legionaries scavenged them after battles. And while Rome drew maps, you shaped rivers and borders with the rhythm of your own seasons. Of course, not everyone wanted a Roman villa or a new Latin name. Some cities resisted, hard. They turned their gates inward, armed their walls, and prepared for the day the eagle banners appeared on the horizon. They knew what was coming, the offer of civilization, and the quiet price that followed, because sometimes Rome couldn't absorb you, and that's where we're headed next. Past the cities that cooperated, past the markets that traded, and into the strongholds that fought, the uprisings, the revolts, the moments when your cities, your people, your way of life said no. Not today, and not without a fight. But before we cross that line, take one last look at the city you've built. It smells like wood smoke and roasted grain. The children are playing near the central hearth. Someone's trading amber for goat skins. The elders are debating whether the south wall needs another reinforcement before winter. It's not Rome. It never needed to be. And now, let's travel to the places where the empire met its limits, where diplomacy failed and defiance began, where uprisings lit fires Rome never quite put out. Let's walk softly. Rebellion doesn't sleep. The empire stretches like a giant marble octopus, all roads, laws, and sharp sandals. and it wants to wrap its arms around you too. But sometimes, just sometimes, you slap the tentacle away. Rome may claim to bring civilization, but you and your neighbors have a different name for it. Invasion. Because eventually someone says no, and when they do, things catch fire. Not just metaphorically, literal fire. Farms, forts, entire cities light up the night sky as the so-called barbarians remind Rome that swords swing both ways. Let's start with Boudica. You may have heard her name whispered around northern fires. A queen, a mother, a woman Rome thought it could break. Spoiler, it couldn't. After her husband's death, the Romans tried to seize her kingdom. They flogged her and assaulted her daughters, expecting obedience to follow. But what followed was vengeance. Boudica didn't write angry letters. She raised an army. Tens of thousands rallied behind her. Britons who had grown tired of Roman taxes, Roman laws, and Roman sneering. They marched on Camulodunum, modern Colchester, razed it. Then Londinium, burned it. Then Verulamium, flattened. Rome, for once, panicked. Legionaries fled. Governors wept. The Emperor Nero reportedly considered pulling out of Britain altogether. Not because of a battlefield loss, but because a woman with a chariot and a reason had made the empire bleed. Interesting fact, Boudica's forces killed more Romans and Romanized Britons than any single battle had managed in that region. And they didn't even have siege engines, just fury and familiarity with the landscape. Rome, of course, responded with overwhelming force. Boudica's revolt was crushed. Her fate is unclear. Poison, sickness, defiance to the end. But she didn't vanish. Statues would rise in her honor centuries later, and her name would echo long after Rome's own memory crumbled. Then there's Arminius. Oh, Arminius, a man who played the long game. Born a Germanic tribal prince, raised within Roman ranks, trained as a soldier, even given Roman citizenship. He knew their drills, their commands, their arrogance, and he used every bit of it against them. In 9 CE, Rome sent 3 legions, about 20,000 soldiers, deep into Germania to secure the border. It seemed routine, calm, just another march through woods and rain. Then came Teutoburg Forest. Rain poured, roads turned to sludge, the legions stretched thin, and that's when Arminius struck. Not with a frontal charge, but with ambush after ambush. He used the trees, the mud, the weather, and the ego of his former commanders to dismantle an army piece by piece. When the final spear was thrown, when the last soldier had fallen, the legions were gone. Entirely. Not just defeated, erased. Eagles captured, armor stripped, officers nailed to trees as warnings. Interesting fact. The defeat at Teutoburg was so traumatic that the Roman historian Suetonius wrote of Emperor Augustus wandering the palace halls, crying, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome never fully recovered from that psychological blow. It stopped trying to conquer Germania beyond the Rhine in any permanent way. Arminius didn't just win a battle, he redrew the map, and he did it by being underestimated. Rome called him a barbarian, but his tactics, timing, and terrain knowledge rivaled any Roman general. He used Rome's arrogance like a weapon, and it worked. These weren't isolated outbursts. Across the empire's frontiers, in Dacia, in Judea, in North Africa, revolts flared up like sparks in a dry forest. Some were crushed, others were never fully extinguished. You see, rebellion wasn't random. It was a response to exploitation, to broken promises, to governors who saw your people as tax fodder and your lands as provinces in waiting. Rebellion was the language spoken when negotiations had no translator. Rome, in turn, grew more defensive. More walls, more legions, more fortresses carved into hillsides and roads that reached suspiciously deep into unconquered territories. But even in the lull between revolts, peace wasn't peace. It was surveillance, occupation, the quiet hum of empire buzzing in the background, just loud enough to remind you who thought they were in charge. Even when you laid down your arms, the empire never really did. Its tax collectors were just less stabby than its centurions. So what happens when the fight ends but the empire stays? That's where we're going next. Because the wars don't always end with fire and drums. Sometimes they end with surrender, treaties, and Roman names awkwardly stitched over your traditions. Sometimes they end with your sons sent to serve in legions far from home. Sometimes they end when your village turns into a Roman market town. Your gods are labeled curiosities, and your stories fade into someone else's history. But not yet. For now, as we leave the smouldering echoes of Boudicca's path and the muddy trails of Teutoburg, we pause. The forest is quiet. The Empire has pulled back. For the moment. You breathe, and the night settles like snow over the hills. Soon, we'll return to that uneasy peace that follows. The era where you're no longer a rebel, but not quite a Roman either. Where roads run through your homeland, but none lead back to what it used to be. Let's walk softly into that world, where you survive not by fighting, but by adapting, or pretending to, or just waiting for the Empire to trip over its own sandals. Sleep for now, but keep an eye on the horizon. Rome always circles back. The border of the Roman Empire isn't just a line on a dusty map. It's a living, looming thing, stone, timber, and tension, stretching across Europe like a very well-funded anxiety disorder. They call it the limes, not the citrus fruit. This one's all Latin and no vitamin C. It's a frontier marked by walls, watchtowers, ditches, and sometimes just a suspiciously straight road where goats mysteriously vanish if they cross it. And you live just beyond it. Or, if you're unlucky, right next to it, close enough to smell Roman olive oil and hear their shouting drills, but never close enough to feel like you belong. The limes isn't one neat wall like Hadrian's up in Britain, although that's the one everyone likes to imagine. Some borders are rivers, like the Danube or the Rhine, flanked by forts and garrisons. Others are just zones where soldiers outnumber trees. But the message is always the same. This is where Rome ends, and everything beyond is trouble. Congratulations, you are officially trouble. Now maybe you weren't planning on being part of some grand anti-Roman identity. Maybe you just wanted to trade a few hides, get a decent knife, and return home before your soup boils over. But the closer you get to the border, the more complicated it gets. Because everything you say, carry, or wear becomes suspicious the moment you approach the watchtower. The guards squint at your beard. They whisper about your sandals, or lack thereof. They eye your pack like it's hiding rebellion under the apples. And heaven help you if you speak Latin. Too well and you're a spy. Not well enough and you're uncultured. Crossing the limes legally means waiting, answering questions. Sometimes paying bribes that are not officially bribes, just gifts to ensure the smooth inspection of goods. Your amber furs and salted fish are welcomed. You are not. You're like the delivery goat of civilization. Everyone wants the package, no one wants to tip. Interesting fact, Roman border forts often doubled as customs posts. Yes, even then, your wagon could be searched, your goods catalogued, and your taxes collected. Sometimes all before breakfast. Bureaucracy doesn't sleep, it just sharpens its stylus. So what's it like living in this edge zone? Well, it's a constant performance. You don't want to anger Rome, but you don't want your own people to think you're getting cozy with the empire either. You trade Roman coins but pretend not to know what denarii means. You wear that fancy brooch you got from a Roman peddler, but only on feast days, and only if no one's looking too hard. It's a tightrope of loyalty, suspicion, and awkward cultural borrowing. Rome, of course, sends its messengers, its tax agents, sometimes even a friendly scholar who wants to learn about your culture, which usually means sketching your weird hat and then disappearing before the stew's ready. They smile politely. They write things down. They call your mudhouse quaint. Then they leave and file a report that includes the phrase barbarian temperament, generally restless. You, meanwhile, watch their forts grow taller. Their roads stretch further. The little market that used to sell local pottery now stocks Roman glass. Your nephew starts using Latin numbers and somehow thinks this makes him clever. You're not being conquered. Not exactly. You're being out-administered. And so, every day, you walk the edge. Some of your neighbors take Roman names. Some marry into Romanized families. Some vanish into the army as auxiliary recruits, voluntarily, though how voluntary it is when your family's starving remains unclear. Others, like you, keep one foot in each world and hope no one asks where your other one is. But life on the edge isn't just cultural confusion, it's also risk. If a skirmish flares up somewhere else along the frontier, suddenly everyone near the border is a suspect. The fort's gates close, patrols increase, markets empty. That Roman friend who used to share wine with you? He now avoids eye contact and double-checks your bags. Or worse, someone from your village does cross a line. A raid, a theft, an insult to a local governor's haircut. And now it's guilt by association. You're not involved, of course, but Rome doesn't love nuance. It prefers marching boots and well-organized retribution. You start wondering, Is it safer to move further inland, away from the walls? Or is that giving up too much? Because as much as you resent the Empire, it's hard to ignore that their traders bring things your family never had before. Tools, spices, stories, even strange gods made of marble and etiquette. Living near Rome is like living next to a volcano that throws out silver coins and lava in equal measure. You try to catch the coins and avoid the lava. Good luck. And yet, here you are, awake at dawn, watching the guards change shifts, listening to the birds pretend they can't hear Latin. Your world has changed, slowly, then all at once. The limes didn't just divide land, it divided time. There was before Rome, and now there's everything else. You're still not Roman, but you're also no longer untouched. What happens next is more than crossing a border. It's crossing into identity. Will your children speak Latin? Will your grandchildren remember the old songs? Will your great-grandchildren know which gods you once prayed to on solstice nights? Hard to say. But tonight, as the torches flicker on the wall and the last Roman patrol shuffles past with cold feet and colder expressions, you wrap your cloak tighter. You lie back in the grass just beyond their jurisdiction. You hear the murmur of river and empire and breath and branches. You are here, neither in nor out, still your own but increasingly theirs. Sleep for now. The forts are quiet, the trade is done. And tomorrow, the border will still be there. Unmoved, unmoving. And you'll have to decide once again which side of it you belong on, or if you even want to choose. So, you did it. Somehow, through bravery or bureaucracy, luck or love, or possibly a misfiled Roman census, you've become a Roman citizen. Congratulations. Please accept this complimentary toga, an incomprehensible 3-part Latin name, and the sudden, dizzying realization that you no longer know quite who you are. It doesn't happen all at once, of course. There's no magical scroll that transforms your home into a marble atrium, or your stew into flamingo tongues. No. Romanization is more like a long, awkward dinner party where you're never quite sure if you're supposed to laugh, bow, or leave early. It might begin with a name. Yours used to be something simple and strong. Now, thanks to Roman naming customs, it's a tangle of syllables, maybe something like Gaius Flavius Nonius Barbaricus. Your friends back home can't pronounce it. Neither can you, if we're honest. The local governor chuckles every time he reads it aloud, and the scribe recording it gives a sigh that says, "Not again." Still, names have power. You're now technically one of them. You can legally marry a Roman citizen. You can own land sometimes. You can be taxed more officially. And, if you're very lucky and very careful, you might someday vote in a municipal election where all the candidates are bald, shouting men who hate each other over drainage contracts. And what of your clothes? Out go the thick-walled tunics and fur-trimmed cloaks of your ancestors. In come clean lines, plain colours, and an entirely new relationship with pins and sandals. You're handed a toga, a garment which appears to have been designed as a cruel joke by someone with too much fabric and not enough patience. It's itchy, it slips, it bunches in places you didn't know clothes could bunch. Interesting fact. The Roman toga could be up to 20 feet long and required considerable practice or assistance to drape properly. It wasn't so much clothing as performance art. You wear it anyway. You walk stiffly through the forum of your newly Romanized town, nodding awkwardly at the bathhouse attendant who now knows your name but still charges you double. You attend a banquet once, trying not to gag on garum, a fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans and no one else in history. They say it's an acquired taste. You suspect it's actually a test. Language is another matter. Latin is now everywhere, on shop signs, market weights, tax notices, temple inscriptions. You learn just enough to ask for directions, order bread, and beg forgiveness for stepping on a senator's sandal. But you still dream in your old tongue. You still curse in it too, especially when your new Roman roof leaks worse than your tribal one ever did. Your children begin to speak Latin more fluently. They recite Roman myths in school, bringing home stories of Aeneas and Romulus and Remus, instead of the old tales your grandparents once sang by firelight. You smile, but something in you aches a little. They don't know the words to the old songs. You realize one day they never learned them. You're living in two worlds now. At the bathhouse, you discuss grain prices like a respectable Roman. At home, you still place small offerings at the feet of your ancestors' carved gods. Just behind the new statue of Jupiter, the tax official gave you as a housewarming gift. It's all very blended. And then there are the dinners. You get invited more often now, to villas with tile floors and reclining couches, to discuss the weather and the empire and whether this year's olive oil has a hint of almond or just mold. You nod. You sip your wine. You don't mention the fact that it tastes like someone strained it through a wool sock. Everyone is trying their best. You're neither laughed at nor fully accepted. You are always interesting. A conversation piece, an example of successful Roman outreach. Sometimes you hear someone refer to you as civilized now. They mean it as a compliment. Still, there are benefits. You sleep indoors, regularly. You no longer fetch water from a stream with a sword strapped to your back. The road outside your house is paved, mostly, and you haven't seen a Roman soldier shake a spear at your goats in weeks. That's got to count for something. Another fact. Many non-Romans in the provinces gained citizenship after serving in the Roman army, especially in auxiliary units. Upon discharge, they were awarded full Roman rights, and often a tiny plot of land in some place they'd never heard of. Rome was very generous when it came to giving you property nowhere near your hometown. But identity is a strange thing. You carry two stories now, the one written in Roman ink and the one whispered in the old tongue around the fire. You belong everywhere and nowhere. Your neighbors think you've gone soft. The Romans still double-check your paperwork. You walk the forum with your new name, but flinch when someone mispronounces your old one. And yet, you endure, you adapt, just as your people always have. You learn which senators to avoid, which festivals involve wine and not goats, and which tax forms not to fill out in ink because someone will accidentally misplace them. You send your children to Roman schools, but tell them stories from before there were schools at all. You survive, and eventually when your time comes, as it does for all, you won't be buried in the old way, with antlers and ash and sacred stones. No, your grave will be orderly, rectangular, Latin inscriptions, coins on your eyes, perhaps even a marble slab if your nephew makes something of himself. But beneath all of that marble and memory and civic-approved ritual, there will still be you. A person who crossed a line, geographically, culturally, personally, and lived to tell both sides of the story. Sleep now, for a moment, in that in-between place. Not Roman, not forgotten, just human. A little confused, a little overfed, wearing a toga you never quite got the hang of. Tomorrow we'll visit your resting place and see how Rome remembers its adopted children. So, you've finally reached the end of your road, or more accurately, the end of Rome's road. Because here on the frontier, death is less of a dramatic end and more of a continuation, with a few cultural revisions. The empire doesn't stop expanding just because your heart does. And when a barbarian turns sort of Roman finally passes on, the funeral is a curious thing. Neither quite Roman, nor quite tribal. It's a blend, a compromise, a ceremony stitched together with incense and instinct. You might be buried in a Roman-style grave, rectangular, precise, aligned neatly in rows, as if the dead might be inspected later by census officials. Your name, the Roman one, is carved into a limestone slab. There may be an inscription, something like Flavius Barbatianus, faithful citizen, father of 3, centurion of the 4th cohort. Impressive. It almost makes you sound like you enjoyed meetings. But peer beneath the earth, not literally, unless you're an archaeologist with a trowel and a respectful permit, and you'll find a few surprises. Grave goods. Not the sort prescribed by Roman law, but offerings from your family. A bronze brooch, a clay figure of a horse, or a worn pendant shaped like a boar, the symbol of your old tribe. You've been remembered in 2 languages, by 2 customs, and likely mourned with 2 kinds of songs, one Latin and liturgical, the other low and ancient, hummed in the back of a hut you hadn't lived in since you were a boy. Interesting fact. Along the Roman frontier, especially in places like Gaul, Germania, and Britain, archaeologists have found burial sites where Roman gravestones sit atop cremation urns filled with grave goods from pre-Roman tribal traditions. The result is not just fascinating archaeology, it's a historical hug between 2 worlds. And the gods are confused. Some mourners light candles to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Others whisper to Woden or Donar, or to spirits whose names never made it onto scrolls. Someone might leave an offering of wine at your tomb. Someone else leaves a tuft of wool or a carved stick figure. One of your children prays to the household lares. Another asks for a sign from the old oak grove where your father taught you to track deer. The gods have their own territorial disputes, but they seem to agree on one thing. You tried your best. There might be a funeral stele erected in your honor, imported from the city, and commissioned by your cousin who now works in tax collection, of all things. The sculptor carves you in Roman dress, a tunic, sandals, one arm raised in a formal farewell. But your nose looks suspiciously large, your beard too wild, and your eyes have that same expression you wore during every Roman festival. Polite confusion. You are gone, but still here. Your face in stone, your name in Latin, your bones resting near your ancestors. Even if the Empire now claims the cemetery as municipal property, it's strange how the Empire handles memory. For emperors, it's grand. Arches, statues, coins with profiles so chiseled they could file marble. But for people like you, the almost Romans, the adopted, the inconveniently complex, memory is smaller, quieter, sometimes even misspelled. Yet in its own way, it's enduring. Centuries later, someone digging in the frost-cracked soil of a forgotten village will find your grave. They'll brush the dirt off your brooch, trace the Latin letters on your tombstone, and wonder at the shape of the world you lived in. Maybe they'll pause, squint and say, "Who was this guy?" And even if they don't know your old name, the one you stopped using when Rome rebranded you, they'll still know you were both part of the empire and apart from it. That duality, that's your legacy. More than any statue, the Roman Empire was vast, yes, but it was held together not just by roads and legions, but by the people at the edges. People like you. People who navigated identity like a worn footpath, who gave up much but never everything, who learned to speak new words without forgetting the old songs. And when the empire starts to crumble, as it eventually will, those at the center will write long letters, desperate edicts, worried scrolls asking what went wrong. But out here, on the frontier, the answer will be simpler. It was never just theirs to hold. The empire borrowed its strength from those it called barbarians, and sometimes the repayment never came. Your children will grow up in that shifting world. Some will embrace Roman life fully, Latin-speaking, Mosaic-loving, citizens of a state that feels half real and half dream. Others will drift back into the woods, into the hills, into the stories told beside firelight, where Roman names are used like jokes, and garum is still considered a punishment. Time will blur it all. In 300 years, the empire will be gone in the west. Cities abandoned, roads overgrown, a few milestones toppled over and repurposed as livestock markers. The names on tombs will fade, the gods will go quiet, but the memory of you, and those like you, will echo. Not in marble, but in myth, in folklore, in the way languages bend and blend, in the way history stutters before it starts again, because what the empire didn't write down, the world still remembers in other ways. So now, as the flickering torchlight dances on the stone carved with your name, let it be known. You weren't just a footnote in someone else's conquest. You were the bridge between worlds. The laughter at the forum, the strength at the frontier, the confusion at the bathhouse, and the wisdom to keep your old gods close, just in case. And as the burial mounds rise and the Roman border shifts once more, you lie still beneath both empire and earth. A life lived in translation, a legacy written in dirt and stone. Now rest where the road ends. The empire has moved on, but you? You're exactly where you were meant to be, remembered, if not by name, then by the mark you left between the lines. Tomorrow, we'll take one last step back, to reflect not on Rome's history books, but on your lived, muddled, magnificent reality. Just before the goats eat your tomb offerings. So now, let's sit back. Not in a Roman reclining banquet couch, but on something sturdier. Maybe a log by a smoky fire, a worn stool in a wooden hall, or just the soft moss beneath an oak near the border stones. Because tonight, we're not centurions or senators. We're not polished in marble or listed on scrolls. Tonight we sit with the people history footnoted, the ones who live just outside the empire's long shadow, the so-called barbarians. You've made it all the way from frostbitten huts to Roman name changes, from shaggy tunics to surprise citizenship ceremonies, from campfires to catapults. And somehow, you've survived. But be honest with yourself. Would you really last? Would you survive the winters without fleece-lined boots, hand sanitizer, or any concept of central heating? Would you make it through a Roman checkpoint with your patience intact, explaining for the third time that no, your tribal tattoo is not a threat? It's just your uncle's idea of branding. Would you adapt to trade negotiations that involve shouting, goat swapping, and the occasional dagger flash? Would you tolerate the bathhouse gossip, the garum-smelling uniforms, the Latin grammar? Let's be real, you'd fold faster than a toga in the rain. The truth is, modern life has softened us. Our beds are not stuffed with straw. Our borders are not patrolled by sword-wielding men named Marcus, and our neighbours usually don't settle disputes with axes. Usually. But those who came before us, those so-called barbarians, they didn't just endure. They adapted. They resisted when they had to, blended when they could, and made 1,000 little choices that let their cultures echo forward through time. Because barbarian didn't mean savage. It meant not Roman. That's it. If you spoke a language other than Latin and didn't attend Roman law school, congratulations, you were labelled a barbarian. Germanic tribes like the Suebi and the Alemanni, Celts in Gaul, Thracians, Dacians, Scythians, Britons with blue-painted skin and big opinions, all lumped together under the same dismissive term, and yet, what resilience. Interesting fact, the very word barbarian comes from the Greek barbaros, meant to mimic the sound of foreign languages, bar bar bar, the ancient world's equivalent of saying, it all just sounds like gibberish to us. Charming, and also wildly inaccurate. These people were farmers, warriors, artisans, poets, and midwives. They had trade routes long before Caesar got curious. They held councils, forged weapons, carved jewelry, sang epics. Some had writing systems. Others relied on oral history so intricate that centuries later, scholars would marvel at the accuracy of what they remembered. Some resisted Rome violently, others joined it, as soldiers, as governors, as husbands and wives. You've now seen it all. The barter markets in muddy fields, the dignified indignation at Roman forts, the quiet rebellions, and the noisy funerals. You've seen identity stitched together from leather, fur, and borrowed Latin. You've seen what happens when people on the outside look in and choose not to knock. Sure, you might not have lasted. Not in the forest raids, not in the back-breaking harvests, not in the passive-aggressive dinner parties where the wine was vinegar and your name sounded like a footnote. But they did. They built homes from timber and thatch and hope. They told stories to explain why the stars danced, why the rivers flooded, and why Rome always wanted more. They shaped children into warriors, elders into lawkeepers, and strangers into kin. And when the legions came with maps and rules and coins, they adapted. Some fought to the last breath, others shrugged and asked how much the empire paid. Still others said nothing at all and kept to the woods, where the empire's roads did not reach. In the end, Rome fell, slowly, messily, like a scroll unraveling in the wind. And the so-called barbarians, they were still there, still farming, still praying, still arguing about goats, still passing on names and songs and stories. Some of them took over the empire, the Franks, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. They didn't end Rome. They became its weird little cousins with stronger opinions and fewer togas. Their children became kings. Their dialects became languages. Their customs became law. They outlived the marble and the Latin. They survived Rome's rise and its fall and the centuries that followed. So now, as the coals of the fire crackle low and the border torches dim in the Roman watchtower across the river, you can finally rest. You've seen the world from the other side. Not from the Senate floor, but from the forest path. Not in a marble villa, but in a hut that smelled like smoked fish and pine sap. Not with the historians, but with the people who lived too far from Rome to be properly remembered, and too close to ever be truly forgotten. Let the propaganda fade. Let the scrolls crumble a little. Tonight, we remember the ones who weren't invited to write history, but who showed up anyway. They were labelled barbarians, but they were builders of resilience, masters of adaptation, survivors of empire, and now it's time to let them rest. So lay down your shield, or more realistically, your heavy woolen cloak. Unlace your sandals, or kick off your muddy boots. Let the fire flicker, let the Latin fade, and rest now just outside the empire's reach. You're warm, you're safe, and the past can sleep while you do too.